Before I declare the meeting open, I have to give you notice of meeting recording. Clause 91(4) of the Governance and Meeting Conduct Local Law provides the following. This public meeting is being recorded to improve access to the meeting for our community. The recording will be published and will be retained by Council in accordance with Council's legal obligations. As a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. I'll now declare the meeting open. Thank you for your attendance, and I'll acknowledge the traditional owners. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. We pay our respects to their elders and to elders from other communities who may be here today. Before I read the opening prayer, may I say that today hasn't been a happy day for the council, having lost one of our councillors last week, and her service was held this morning. You'll notice that there's a vacant seat beside me and a flower to represent Ruth being here tonight. So it's not a happy day, but so I'd ask you all to be upstanding and we have a minute's silence for her, please. Thank you very much, and whilst you're standing, I'll read the opening prayer. Almighty God, we humbly ask Thee to bless and guide this council in its deliberations, so that we may truly preserve the welfare of the people whom we serve. Amen. All councillors are present. No citizenship ceremony. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the 19th of September 2017. Someone like to move those minutes to the true record? Councillor Benton and Councillor Rees. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. Any conflict of interest disclosures? Reception of petitions, hearing of deputations. Councillor reports. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to thank Jamie Carroll. This is the last council meeting that she'll be here. And thank you very much for the service she's given the real city of Wangaratta. And Jamie's an extremely creative woman, and we really, really appreciate the work she's done over the time she's been here. And I know that you will go on to do an enormous amount of work with the talent you have. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Councillor Bussell. Wish to say anything, Councillor Fuller?
Just echoing Councillor Bussell, thank you very much for your input and effort in not only wrangling us on occasions, but providing information to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fuller. Corporate Services Annual Report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The first report is about the adoption of the annual report for 2016-17. The annual report contains three main sections: the report of operations from page 1 to 39, performance statement, and the financial statements make up the back end of the report. The report of operations contains lots of information. It contains the Mayor's and CEO's message, council profile and staff information, statutory information, and a governance and management checklist. The timeline for the annual report is that the Audit Committee in their September meeting recommended the adoption by Council in principle of the financial and performance statements, which Council so did at their September ordinary meeting. And then by the 30th of September, Council is required to submit its annual report to the Minister. As soon as practical, after submitting it to the Minister, Council is required to consider the annual report at a meeting that is open to the public. So hence we are doing that now, and the recommendation is that Council consider its annual report for 16-17.
Any questions from the gallery? I probably should have indicated at the start that there will be question time on the items in the agenda, and I'll ask for the gallery before we actually ask for the councillors. No questions from the gallery? I'd like to move the recommendation. Move Councillor Curry, second Councillor Rees. Any discussion? No discussion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 13.2.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This item is to do with a special committees review that's been undertaken by Council. What I will do is read the recommendation, which will explain the contents of the report, and the recommendation is quite lengthy, so I'll just summarise that a bit. The recommendation asks Council to adopt the revised appointments to committees of Council policy 2017. This policy has been out for public comment, and Council has received comments and heard submissions in relation to that policy. That Council delegates the powers, duties and functions set out in the Hall and Reserve Special Committees delegation instrument for 14 existing committees. They are mainly our Hall committees, including the Eldorado Memorial Hall Special Committee. That Council delegates the powers, duties and functions set out in the Friends of Lecluta Delegation Instrument 2017. That Council dissolves the Wangaratta Showgrounds Special Committee effective 30th of June 2018. And finally, engages with the community and Wangaratta Showgrounds user groups to involve them in the development of an effective and equitable facility allocation policy, implementation of standardised user leases and licences, development of a strong business plan for the precinct, prioritisation of infrastructure development, and marketing the precinct and its facilities.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No questions from... Would you please come to the microphone, state your name and...
Yeah, John Bell. I'm president of the Eldorado Hall Committee at present. Some of the committee have been over this document, and we've had a few sort of things we're not so happy with. And one was to do with the fact that the council can just remove the committee at any one time, and there was no real procedure there for us to state our case. The other part of it was that an incorporation body could approach council and then take over this committee or this hall, or any other community hall. This hall celebrated 80 years last year from when it originally opened. and it's really a community hall, and we as a committee work for this hall for the community. We try and run functions, we try and maintain the hall with the functions we run or the money we earn from those functions. There is some support, of course, from the Royal City Wangaratta. And in this document, it's stating that the hall committee will need to pay municipal costs, which we presume. We did ask our question in, we sent a submission in to whether it includes rates and bin collection and so forth. We have picked up a bill in the last 6 months from Statcom, that's an inspection on the building, which is $240. The insurance comes out of our allocation from council each year. So the allocation of $1,400 is now down to about $12. And each year it costs us generally around about $5,000 to maintain this hall. That's just maintaining, that's not adding extras. And at the moment we're working hard to raise money to replace the main hall iron. And a couple of months ago we had the iron over the kitchen replaced, which is just over $3,000. So before people, I guess, the council vote on it, like, we sort of run this for the community. I know we're management under the rules and regs of the Rural City Wangaratta. They asking us to inspect the hall as far as safety and if we find any risks. Well, most of us on the hall committee are not qualified to be inspecting buildings as far as their compliance or their safety side of it. So I find there's a few things in this document which we'd like to discuss further, but I guess that's up to what council want to do with that. But there's a few things in there, one about removing us, two, putting an incorporation in here when this is a community hall. I mean, the community support us as a committee and we try and put on as many events as we can, again being financially sustainable. And there is actually a function on here Saturday night if you're interested, only costs you $5. Live bands, locals, all involved, all local people. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll just make some general comments, John. So the review has standardised all agreements across all of the halls. So if your agreement, that will be a standard set of agreements across all of council special committees. So I think we'll work with you to understand your concerns. You did say that you put a submission in, so it would have been considered by council during that process. So we'll work with you. We haven't had other submissions from other hall committees, so we'll just work with you to alleviate your concerns in relation to those matters.
Any other questions? Someone like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Ruiz. Seconder? Councillor Curry. Any discussion? Councillor Bussell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I know Jamie's done work on this. Can you please explain to me the general intent with the small halls of what the difference is going to be to as they currently run or how they're going to run now? Can you please explain that?
Yeah, so like Ruth just mentioned, we're required under legislation to review this policy and update it, and as part of that we've made sure that it's consistent across all of the halls. So there was some inconsistencies before around the numbers of people that were going to be on the committees and the length of tenure and their responsibilities. So we've made sure that's all consistent. But in terms of the operations of the committees, their realm of what they are able to do and what they're responsible for, it's generally very consistent with what it was before, and there's certainly no move to disempower any of the committees in any way. So, which I know was some of the concerns that came through originally. So.
Any other discussion? Well, I did ask before. I'm sorry, but once the recommendation's been moved and seconded. further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 13.3.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This recommendation is regarding a proposed lease for the SES Wangaratta headquarters. Council is currently under negotiation to enter into a long-term lease for a block of land that is currently located on the former Ovens College site in Handley Street. The SES is currently located on Crown land in Millard Street, and state government funding has been provided to rebuild the local SES headquarters. 4,500 square metres at Handley Street has been designated for the relocation. A permit has been issued and subdivision is currently being finalised. Due to the length of the lease, which is proposed to be a 20 years plus 20 years term, public consultation is required for council to enter into a lease of that length. So the recommendation is on page 16, that council gives public notice of its intention to lease the land to the SES, inviting submissions on the proposed lease until Friday the 17th of November, that a council establishes a committee of council to hear any persons who have requested to be heard in respect of their submissions. If no submissions are received, that council authorises the Director of Corporate Services to complete the formal procedures to lease the land, including the execution of all relevant documentation. And if submissions are received, that council consider all submissions in deciding whether or not to lease the land at a future council meeting.
Questions from the gallery? The block of land that we're talking about is next to the fire station. No questions from the gallery. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Benton and Councillor Bussell. Any discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 13.4.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This item deals with the establishment of a rating strategy reference group. Council is seeking expressions of interest from the community members who would like to be involved in its rating strategy reference group. This group will provide advice to Council on its rating strategy leading into the 17-18 budget on matters such as rating differentials, sharing rates across the categories of ratepayers, special rates or charges, and ratepayer engagement. The recommendation is on page 20 of the agenda, and that is that Council adopts the rating strategy reference group terms of reference, calls for nominations to the rating strategy reference group, including the role of independent chair, and authorises the CEO and Mayor to review nominations and recommend appropriate appointments for the consideration of Council.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Rees, Councillor Fuller. Any discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 13.5, September quarter figures.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The September 2017 quarterly finance report is before Council tonight. This is the first quarterly finance report to be made to the public for this financial year and compares Council's year-to-date performance against its year-to-date budget as at September 2017 for both operational and capital works. Council has favourable variances for income of 2%, mainly due to the recognition of packaged care income, and expenditure is favourable by 4%, mainly due to the delay in the finalisation of our enterprise agreement and the subsequent expenditure that will flow from that. Capital expenditure is within 1% of year-to-date CapEx budget.
Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Curry, second Councillor Benton. Any discussion? No discussion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 13.6.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The final report for corporate services is in relation to Council Plan Progress Report. Once again, this is our first quarterly report on the progress against our council plan. We have 5 pillars in our council plan and we have a number of measures against those pillars. Some of those are favourable, 11 indicators favourable, 5 indicators unfavourable, and the recommendation is that Council receives the Council Plan 2017-2021 Progress Report for the period 1st of July to 30th of September 2017.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Fuller, second Councillor Roos. Any discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion is carried. Now move on to community wellbeing.
Thank you. This report is before Council tonight for consideration and seeking endorsement to adopt the final 2017-2021 Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan. So this plan has been placed out for community review and comment by Council and has received significant feedback and interest from our community and our health and community service partners. The recommendation before Council tonight is that Council endorses the final 2017-2021 Municipal Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, which is attached, notifies all organisations who made written submissions of the decision and the reasons for that decision, and forwards a copy of the final plan to the Department of Health and Human Services by the 31st of October in accordance with the Public Health and Wellbeing Act.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Curry. Seconder. Councillor Rees. Any discussion? Councillor Curry. Well, you've got the right because you moved the motion. Yeah.
Does this work? Yeah. I'd just like to thank Jamie for this particular policy. Jamie gave a presentation about Wangaratta and some of the statistics around Wangaratta, and I actually found it quite frightening. What this public health does is puts a lot of measures in place to improve Wangaratta. I think there will be a lot of partnerships that have to happen, and it's going to take a lot of work to actually achieve these outcomes. I think I'm really looking forward to the outcomes that will come from this, and I look forward to the measurements along the way with all the partnerships that have occurred. It will only strengthen Wangaratta in the long term.
Right, no. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. Infrastructure services.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This first report is presented to Council to seek endorsement of proposed rectification works on the Ovens River where we recently had a slippage occur. So this slippage was where some of the bank slipped into the river adjacent to the CFA running track. It's caused instability in that track and thus safety concerns. So we've sought approval from NECMA to complete repair works. We've had it designed by a firm qualified to do so with NECMA, and they've given us approval to go ahead and repair it as long as we use their authorised contractors, and we've subsequently sought quotes from those contractors. There is no money for this project in the budget as it was totally unforeseen, so we're seeking approval to proceed, and then we'd make adjustments at the mid-year budget review. So the recommendation tonight is that Council approve the proposed rectification for the Ovens River bank adjacent to the CFA running track and the proposed process for procurement of the remediation works.
Thank you, Mr Clark. I just wonder if you might like to inform the people in the gallery what NEMCA stands for.
ECMA is the North East Catchment Management Authority, so they're the authority that controls all activities on the waterways.
Any questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone move the recommendation. Councillor Fuller, Councillor Benton. Any discussion? Councillor Bussell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Director Clark. Could he please explain to me how he's going to fix this natural occurrence with the bank slipping in Apex Park? What sort of materials, how do you plan to do it? Thank you.
So the design that we've had approved by NECMA is basically using a lot of rock. So large rock will be placed in the hole on the water side, then some smaller rock, and then some soil fill. So it's a typical beaching method of repairing this sort of damage.
Councillor Rose.
No, it was sort of the same question, so thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Curry.
I made a comment at the last meeting that it's a rare occasion that I will vote for any spending outside of budget, but in hindsight, you know, it's a case of when safety matters, it should just be passed regardless. Like, I mean, it shouldn't be a question, it shouldn't be a debate.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. Naming of unroad roads.
So this report is brought to Council to seek approval to advertise Council's intention to name 4 unnamed roads at Springhurst. So the Council's place naming committee identified these roads. There's been some consultation with some Springhurst community members, and we've come up with 4 names at this stage. So the recommendation tonight is that Council advertise its intention to name the unnamed roads at Springhurst, seeking feedback on the proposals from the wider community and referral authorities. And the 4 roads are Burt Lane, Gatehouse Road, Mardling Road and Genvy Lane. And Genvy Lane is an extension of the existing Genvy Lane. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No one lives in Springhurst. In the gallery. Have someone move the recommendation. Move Councillor Fuller, seconded Councillor Benton. Any discussion on the motion?
I'd just like to acknowledge the good work that the Place Naming Committee did in regards to researching this, help from Mr. Benton in regards to getting some feedback from the community so far. And these guys are volunteers and they do a lot of research for us, and it's very appreciative.
Thank you.
You, Mr. Mayor, the community I've spoken to up there at Springhurst is supportive of it, and I endorse Councillor Fuller's words in relation to the researching of the Mardling Road, which wasn't one of the names on the list. At a meeting at the CFA last night, they were all very supportive of it, and it tidies up a lot of the lanes and roads that are in Springhurst that have no name on them, and now we have this emergency and situation where I think it's very important that these roads and lanes be named because of the mapping and the way the emergency services operate these days.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 16.1 Development Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item tonight from Development Services is the Agriculture and Agribusiness Advisory Committee. This is one of Council's advisory committees, and 3 of its members have their term expiring or they've expired in August 2017. Council has advertised its intention for expressions of interest to fill those vacancies. We received 3 nominations for the 3 vacant places, and the recommendation tonight is that Council appoints Graham Norman, Rosie Bennett and Jane Carney to the 3 vacant positions, and that Council advises the applicants of its decision.
Any questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation? Move Councillor Benton, second Councillor Roos. Any discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Those against? Motion's carried. 16.2, sale of industrial land.
Item 16.2 tonight is to address Council's statutory obligations under the Local Government Act in relation to the sale of council land. Council has previously developed what is known as Murrell Street in Wangaratta as an industrial estate, and there was a balanced parcel of land to the north that was identified as a future stage for that development. Council has received some significant interest in relation to some of that land from both some existing businesses in Murrell Street about expansion and also some new businesses coming to town. Council has engaged some consultants to prepare a subdivision plan, and of the 11 lots that have been proposed in that subdivision plan, Council has received initial offers for 9 of them. Now we have to address our statutory obligations, and it is proposed that Council gives notice of its intention to sell the land at Lot A, PS 304059W, situated at Murrell Street. Establishes a committee of Council to hear any persons who have requested to be heard in respect to the submissions on the sale of the land, and that considers all submissions when deciding whether or not to sell the land in Murrell Street, as contained in the certificate of title. And this is about Council facilitating future development of, as I said, not only new businesses but also the expansion of some existing businesses in that vicinity.
Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Bustle, Councillor Curry. Any discussion? Councillor Roos.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's always a great sign to see council land coming up for sale, and with interest, as Director Green said, 9 out of the 11 allotments is a great indication that obviously Wangaratta industrially is moving ahead. There's companies wishing to build premises, etc. there in expansion of their business or the site for new business. So it's a great thing for the rural city of Wangaratta. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Bustle.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is to Director Green. Is this the last lot of land in Murrell Street, or is there still more to be sold there?
This is the last parcel of land that Council owns in Murrell Street. There are previous lots that have been created that are vacant in Murrell Street that are owned by private individuals or companies.
Any other discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 16.3, Industrial Land Use Strategy.
Item 16.3 is the Wangaratta Industrial Land Use Strategy, consideration of submissions. Council has previously considered the draft strategy at the July meeting, at which time it endorsed it for consultation. The consultation has occurred and resulted in 6 submissions being received. None of the submissions have required major changes or elicited major changes to the document. Some changes have been made in accordance with those requests and are referred to in the attachment on tonight's Council report. The recommendation is that Council notes all of the submissions to the draft Wangaratta Industrial Land Use Strategy 2017, notes the comments responding to the submissions and the actions suggested to address the matters raised within those submissions where applicable, adopts the Wangaratta Industrial Land Use Strategy 2017 and the supporting background report, subject to the changes identified in the table in Appendix 1 to address the feedback from the community consultation, advises all submitters of Council's decision to adopt the strategy, and prepares the documentation and seeks authorisation to prepare and exhibit a planning scheme amendment to the Wangaratta Planning Scheme to implement the relevant recommendations of the strategy, and delegates the Chief Executive Officer responsibility to make any changes to the adopted documents and planning scheme in accordance with the requirements of the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, or as identified through the preparation of the planning scheme amendment material. This strategy was set out to really identify where are the existing industrial areas within the Wangaratta municipality, look at what needs to be done in terms of further strengthening either their controls, particularly around some of the areas where there's been some encroachment of residential development onto existing buffer zones of some of our larger industries. And one of those was one of the submitters to this proposal that was concerned about further residential encroachment onto their operations. And also to look at some of the land. We previously had some land that was shown on our planning scheme maps as industrial and shown as vacant industrial, when in fact it was actually occupied, but occupied by uses that were not of an industrial nature. So it was really getting a handle on exactly what is available within the municipality.
Questions from the gallery? Easy tonight. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Rees, Councillor Bustle. Any discussion? Councillor Rees. You can have two goes with someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In supporting this recommendation, I still want to put it on the table that in relation to section number 6 of this recommendation, it gives the indication that the officers can have a free will. Now, I make sure that the intent of that is to make it that it is facilitate the amendment of any discussions from other authorities that come forward in the matter of forming the amendment going forward. And in the strategy, it outlined the position of the Wangaratta facility, or Gather Coal's facility there, to be such of an importance in an existing use zone that moving forward that we make sure that that piece of facility is become and protected as best we can, because we're getting to a situation in this area that facilities to process animals is becoming very scarce, and the regulations are coming so demanding that there's nearly a closure every couple of months of an abattoirs on the eastern seaboard, and we've got an abattoirs there that is able to process quite a lot of stock that is for on a small basis. And if we still want to make sure that we become the tourist gourmet region, I think it's one facility that we must ensure that doesn't have any more impediments in being able to facilitate its operations. And I just would like to make sure that that's put to the intent of the council in moving forward with this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other discussion? Councillor Rees.
This industrial land strategy is also is progress for the future of the rural city of Wangaratta to have land available for future development and make sure everything's in its right line prior to this future development. And it's a good thing to have it available now rather than waiting for an organisation to come to Wangaratta and we've got nothing available for them or the zoning doesn't suit. So thank you.
Thank you. Put the recommendation. Those in favour? Motion's carried. 16.4 Millawa Township.
Item 16.4 is Wangaratta Planning Scheme Amendment C68 Part 1, which is the Millawa Township Development Plan. This report is presented to Council as the relevant planning authority to consider the recently received panel report in relation to this amendment. The report contains the planning panel's review of Amendment C68 Part 1 and their recommendations following the panel hearing held on the 8th of August 2017. A copy of that panel report actually accompanies this report in Attachment 1. Pursuant to Section 27 of the Planning and Environment Act, Council must now consider the panel report before deciding to adopt or abandon the amendment. In preparation of this report, a detailed analysis has been undertaken of the relevant conclusions and recommendations outlined in the panel's report that accompanies this document. In summary, the panel has generally supported Council's strategic approach to Amendment C68, Part 1, and recommends that the amendment be adopted as exhibited, subject to some minor changes. Part of the process around these township development plans was really for Council to be on the front foot, similar to the industrial land strategy, to make sure that we have the correct zonings in place and that we are following things like the introduction of new infrastructure to these towns. And Millawall was one of them, where the introduction of sewer into the township area has freed up larger amounts of land that was previously not available due to the need for septic and on-site wastewater disposal systems. The recommendation tonight is that Council considers the panel report in accordance with Section 27 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. Pursuant to Section 29(1) of the Act, adopts the Amendment C68 Part 1, subject to the changes and actions identified in Attachment 2, Analysis of Panel Report Submissions. Pursuant to Section 31(1) of the Act, submit the adopted amendment to the Minister for Planning for approval, pursuant to Section 35 of the Act, and notifies the submitters in writing of Council's decision.
Thank you. Questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery. Someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Bussell, Councillor Rees. Councillor Bussell, you wish to speak? Councillor Rees?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This Part 1 obviously is development for future lots there in Millawa. A lot of it is purely the correction of anomalies where existing rural living and township lots are in a farming zone, and this is to adjust those and make them right as they have been over the years. It does free up some land in Millawa, but not enough. In Part 2 of our development plan here for Millawa, which considers Precinct E, which will be looked at upon this going through, and be looked at urgently, more so the land north of Kerrs Road, east of Factory Road, which is currently zoned farming zone, will change to rural living. But I believe, and I believe a lot of my fellow councillors do believe, that it should be zoned LDRZ, and that will come up in Part 2 of our agreement very early in the near future. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. No special committee reports. Advisory committee reports.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As is customary, we have a series of sets of minutes from various advisory committees that have met through September and August, including the Ag Advisory Committee, Youth Council, the Audit Advisory Committee, our Economic Development Committee, Arts, Culture and Heritage Committee, and the Sports and Rec Advisory Committee. Those minutes are all attached to the agenda, and the recommendation is that Council notes those minutes from those committees.
Any questions from the gallery? No questions from the gallery? Someone like to move the recommendation that we note the minutes? Councillor Benton, Councillor Curry. Any discussion? Put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. Assemblies of councillors.
Thank you. Similarly, we report assembly of councillor records to each council meeting after they have occurred, and there is a record of meetings that occurred through October and September and one in August that are attached for everybody's information, and the recommendation is that council receives the reports of assemblies of councillors.
Any questions from the gallery? I'd like to move the recommendation. Councillor Curry. Well, I got a seconder. Councillor Fuller. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? Motion's carried. No notice of motion. We do have an urgent matter of business that should not take more than 5 minutes, and it is confidential, so we need to go into the other room for 5 minutes. So I want someone to move We move into confidential. Got a seconder? Councillor Curry. So if... Oh, those in favour? Motion's carried. If you'll excuse us for a couple of minutes. Thank you for your patience. And we do have another item of urgent business. Councillor Fuller.
I just seek permission from my fellow councillors to, in the interim, be the portfolio holder for Arts, Culture and Heritage in Ruth's absence until such time as we realign our portfolios, if in agreement with my councillors.
Someone like to move that? Councillor Reid, Councillor Curry. Any discussion? Put the motion, those in favour? Motion's carried. We're now down to public question time. You may step forward and use the microphone, please. State your name.
Good evening. My name is Maureen Hearn, and I'd like to make a few observances, if I could, please. If that is okay. Yeah. I would like to say a thank you to the Hall Committee, the Eldorado Hall Committee of Management. They are newly gathered together again for the next, I think, 3 years. Unless something happens. For a long time, they have been trying to raise money, funds, to put a new roof on this establishment. I think it's maybe 12 months. They need apparently $24,000, and they have raised $5,000. And I was just wondering if the council could manage to assist them in perhaps pointing them to a bin of money somewhere or another in the form of a grant or grants to help. Because $5,000 in a year, the roof, when is that going to happen? Is that going to be 2030? It looks like it. I feel that perhaps as this building was built by the Eldorado folk many years ago and was given to the rural city, I feel that perhaps the rural city could do something to assist the committee. I feel that people should look to see what is happening in this facility. I feel that the toilets are inadequate. I feel that there should be a suitable toilet for people with disabilities. This, I think, is really, really paramount. And I feel that the gentleman's place of relief needs to be looked at, because when we have our bowling days, when this is for the senior citizens, we have probably about 60 people here, and apparently that facility doesn't quite cope in the gentleman's toilet. There's just a few things that I think really should be looked at. I know that the committee have been trying desperately to do things as possibly as they can, but it's not happening fast enough, I don't think. So, apart from the fact that we've got problems with water, our toilets, we haven't got a half a button flush. It's sort of inadequate. Why isn't it being updated? We had a situation up in the corner here at the park where they put in a tremendous amount of money to that little section up there. They did a beautiful job to the playground, and they put in a shower, and a new toilet, I believe. So that was really good. But surely this here could have been looked at and needs to be upgraded. And I think it needs to be done pretty quickly if we can. This business of buying iron, if we're really sure of putting a new roof on, maybe we could ask people, instead of buying a brick, maybe they could buy a sheet of iron. And that way we can help the committee put a roof on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask the CEO to respond.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Maureen, for your question. We are very lucky as a Shire to have a number of classic old halls, including this one, that are all obviously very deserving of restoration and love and attention. You do have a member on your committee who is relatively familiar with the way we maintain buildings in our Shire, because he did it for I don't know how many decades, but quite some time, and quite well. Thanks, John. There's probably a couple of different avenues. We have a budget process every year, and there is an opportunity through that budget process for groups like the committee to make a budget submission for allocations to be put into the budget. We also have an annual community grants program, which has both a minor and a major category, which is a potential source of funding. And for the first time, this new council has made a specific allocation available for projects in its rural townships. So we're just going through the process over the next couple of months of looking at a range of things, including some community plans that were formally done, and trying to come back to council with a range of priority projects to be put forward over the next 4 or 5 years and carried out in its rural townships. So there are potentially 2 or 3 pretty good avenues that could be explored with the committee, and I think John's probably got a pretty good network of people within council still that can provide him good advice on that. Some of the other sources of funding that have previously come from state government for these sorts of halls unfortunately don't exist in regional cities like Wangaratta, so we're kind of missing out on what was a pretty rich source of funding previously for these sorts of projects from the state.
Other questions?
Mr Mayor, my name is Robert Morton, and this is in relation to Amendment C68. Now that Part 1 has been approved and Part 2 has been separated, and considering that Council considered it important enough to reject the recommendation as C69, where it was recommended that it be abandoned for rural living zone, can Council give me a timeline on when Part 2 will be addressed?
Mr Green?
Thanks, Rob, for your question. In relation to the amendment and what's been asked by Council to consider, we will need to go back to first principles for the development and supply and demand analysis for that. That work will continue. In terms of an exact time frame, I can't give that to you at the moment. We have a number of projects on in terms of our strategic planning program, and our strategic planning resources are at 1.8 staff members. So we only have 2 staff that work on those particular projects. We will certainly be sourcing some, looking at some alternatives of how we can resource that, but the work for that is not likely to occur until probably early in the new year.
Okay, it's just that you managed to reject the recommendation in July 2016 of C69 report. You've managed to have it put into C68. You've managed to have public display, get the submissions in, get a panel hearing and a report from C68 by August 2017. That's 13 months for that to be completed, where most of your work has now been done for Part 2, I believe. I understand that you do have to go back and it may require a new amendment, but with the other part of C68 Part 1 where there was a land being rezoned from farming to low density residential on the Snow Road. In part of I think it's on the map of the report. The panel chairman asked the Shire on the day of the hearing to phone the neighbours to see if there are any objections. And he said, if there aren't any objections and there aren't any objections from Vic Roads, why can't it go through? And I'm just wondering what's different between that and our situation.
In terms of those two scenarios, they are quite vastly different in that one was going from a farming zone to a township zone, and the existing use of that land as it considers now is a township use. It's a small block of land that has a house on it. It's certainly not a farming, and it was representational of the adjoining township land that it adjoined. In your particular areas, the proposals previously put forward and in consideration of the Millward Township Development Plan, in recognising the current use of the land within that particular precinct, it represents a rural living environment, and that's what council was proposing in terms of its minimum lot size and the development that is currently there, which is a dwelling with a small curtilage of land that can be used for small animals or small horticulture activities. So the current representation was that it was a rural living use. To go to a low density residential use increases the potential supply of land, and that's where, in terms of justifying, unfortunately the planning scheme is not necessarily about a popular vote, it's about having the supply figures and the demand figures that back up any future amendments of land. So that's the work that council needs to consider in terms of that. What does that do to the supply of land should the zoning change?
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to let it drag on. I disagree with everything Mr. Green has said about that because we adjoin low density residential and township, where he said it's entirely different. So rather than let it drag on, I think we should have discussions with the council and the planning department. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions from the gallery? Mr. Nevin, I think. And then the lady next to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I asked someone here tonight what they knew about C75. They'd never heard of it. Now, I know the council has advertised it statutorily, but if you hadn't heard about it in any way and you went into the council website to see is there anything I should perhaps have my eye on by way of needing to put in submissions, you'll be very lucky if you find anything about C75. On the front page of your website, when you open it, on the right-hand side, down the bottom we have hot topics. Down the bottom of hot topics, we have documents on public exhibition. So that's exactly where you would go, I think. It's not there. Hasn't been there. What's there at the moment is draft asset management strategy, draft municipal emergency management plan. Now, I don't believe C75 has ever been there. Now, I know about it and I know where to find it and I got it. But people just get looking at the front page of your website just to keep in touch with things, that is not adequate, I don't believe, public consultation, and I really think you need to extend your period of exhibition of C75, which I think closed today. So my question is, why isn't it there?
Through the Mayor, I think the answer, Gary, is probably because with amendments of these types, they're actually done through the state government's process and their website rather than ours. We should certainly have a pointer to that if we haven't already, so we can't check tonight because we don't have any service. I was just trying to look on the website, but I left myself wide open for that, didn't I? So I'll certainly go back and check whether...
There's no link from your items of hot topics, documents on public exhibition. So I think if you're going to have a heading, documents on public exhibition, your responsibility surely is to link to wherever it is.
I
Thank
agree.
you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Oh, not as tall as the others. Gail Robertson, thank you for coming out here to Eldorado. 2 or 3 different things. First, what's the philosophy with the woodlots up the road? Now, I thought it was to assist those older people who couldn't go up bush to get wood, and sometimes they'd be able to get a permit or whatever and get some wood from the woodlot. I don't know about any of you people, but I can't cut through a piece of wood about that big. Couldn't even jump over it. Couldn't even, it was so high, goodness knows. It was there for a lot of the winter, and then all of a sudden one day I could hear chainsaws. I'm only a kilometre out of town. I could hear the chainsaws, and then the next day it was gone. So if you're going to provide wood for the oldies in Eldorado, can we please have it of a manageable size, or put it there till it dries, but make sure somebody looks after it so it doesn't disappear in the middle of the night with somebody with a big chainsaw. So that's number 1. 2, tourists to this area up until recently were able to stay at the Eldorado Caravan Park. That's closed. So as a council and your project's rural township, what have you got in mind to assist tourists to come and stay in this area? Now, I'm a traveller. I've driven to Darwin this year and back. I understand pulling off to the side of the road and camping and doing all of that. I understand that down here at the Rec Reserve you can, 10 days in advance, you can book your site and pay $40 a night and you can stay there, but that's not what us grey nomads do. At the Caravan Park, when we stayed there last November, there were people from Canberra and Melbourne and Sydney that met here on a regular basis with their horses. They're no longer going to be able to do that. So I'd like to think that council wouldn't see us as the forgotten town at the end of the road. There is a dirt track that goes somewhere, but please, can you look at it as part of your tourism strategy? And I heard infrastructure mentioned. Is there any infrastructure looked at or coming up or thought about for Eldorado? Or is that just something that happens in other places? Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen, Gail, for the questions. In relation to the one around woodlots, certainly they do come from council's tree crews, and they do endeavour to cut them up into smaller, more manageable parcels, but certainly I can pass that on to the Parks and...
Yep. In regard to infrastructure, what's happening, Trezise Street is being sealed in the coming couple of months. So we've been doing a lot of work with the residents, or some of the residents there, and that road will be sealed shortly. So that's one thing. We did a lot of work down near that intersection, Trezise Street, improving the drainage recently, and that's now working a lot better than it was. So there are a couple of things. Of course, the walking path went in the last couple of years, and the work in the park was done in the last couple of years. So there's been quite a bit of infrastructure work in Eldorado in the last probably two and a half years. The planning work that was spoken about earlier, that will seek community involvement and input and look at how things are done in the rural townships in the coming years. So that'll be your chance to have a real say as to what you think the priorities are. And we don't want those plans to be real pie in the sky things that perhaps have happened in the past. We want them to be really realistic plans that we can achieve, and sensible priorities that we can evaluate, we can do detailed estimates and then get some real work happening. So that'll be a chance to have a real say.
Mr. Jones.
Can I just ask Gail, what happened to the caravan park? Has it been sold off or something? Is that what you're saying? Or and is the caravan park site privately owned by the fellow that owned it? Yes, not publicly owned. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Brian Jones from Wangaratta. I've been involved with North Wangaratta for quite a while now, and as I understand, there's a move afoot to try and get the speed limit in front of the Vine Hotel dropped back to 50 k's an hour for safety's sake. Does the council have the authority to change the speed limit?
Short answer, no. All speed limits are controlled by Vic Roads. We certainly work with Vic Roads and we're working with them on that proposal at the moment. You may have noticed a traffic counter is in place at the moment, and that will go to inform the decision making.
Oh, thank you.
We work with police and Vic Roads, but they have the final say.
Okay, good.
Yes. You're next, Mr. Fox.
Hi, my name's Natasha Lobban. Just two quick questions. Just seeking a bit of an update on what's happening with the Salyard situation, a timeline as to how that's all progressing, and also if an advisory committee is being established as was previously discussed.
Through the chair, we do have a fairly detailed timeline now that we're working through, which kind of culminates around June, July next year, when we anticipate the handover would occur, unless it happens more quickly than that.
That's still the target.
That's still the timeline.
Yep.
The stage we're up to at the moment is we now have draft rules of association, constitution, those sorts of things, which a few of us are just checking through to ensure that we think they're suitable for the purposes that council wants to establish. There's a process, as I think we've talked about before, we've got to get ministerial approval to do it and a risk assessment done and some of those things. So we'll get going on those as soon as we're comfortable that we've got constitution type documentation looking okay. So still very much working towards those sorts of timelines. Yep. We haven't really done any further work on what the criteria and membership of the actual group who will ultimately run this thing looks like, but that's work that we'll get going with fairly shortly.
Yep. And the advisory committee, will that still be going ahead, or has that been scrapped?
I'm not sure there's actually been any commitment to an advisory committee
it was
per
just
se.
mentioned early on, so
certainly the intent would be to work closely with the VFF and the agents, as we progress through those stages that I've talked about. We would want you guys to have a look at some of the documentation and various other parts of the process. So working closely with those two groups is certainly still intended, probably not through a formal advisory committee mechanism.
Yep, no, thank you. And the other question was just about the proposed changes to Victoria's farm planning regulations. Are councillors across all of that, and do they have any opinions as to, do they agree with them? Harvey looks like you've seen them, and Harry looks like he's seen them by the...
I have gone over them, Natasha, and I must admit I agree with you with some of them in our private discussions about them. I think some of them are impractical to implement, and I passed that on to the CEO, that I got an email that he was passing that further down to Director Green's area to come back with some sort of, I hope, format that we do a submission to it.
It's obviously an issue that has massive ramifications for farmland across the area, and also for the workload of already overworked planners for the council. So, it would be good to see. Yeah, is that something? Sorry, Director Green, that has been looked at?
Am I on? certainly the provisions have been released by the state, and there's a number of seminars and I suppose sessions that are being held by DELP in relation to, and some of our staff have attended and are attending more of those.
I think there's one, yeah.
And I also had some discussions with someone from the VFF actually today regarding some of the provisions. So, so they're certainly aware of it, and they're gathering some information in order to put forward a proposed submission for council's consideration.
Okay, so that'll come back through the councillors, yep, before submission. No worries, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Fox.
Brian Fox from Wangaratta. The first thing I'd like to do tonight is congratulate the CEO on his sartorial splendour. We've got the tie and the hat and the cufflinks on. Mr. Mayor,
that's your first question.
In your preamble to the document on progress within the city, there's this little gem. It says the transfer of infrastructure by developers on completion of subdivisions added another 1.6 million to the bottom line. These assets become our property and hence increase council's asset levels. So that prompts the question from me, is all of our infrastructure valued? Can I look up and find out how much a bridge is worth in Edi or the Swan Street Bridge? Because if we're adding assets, what are we adding them to?
Yes, all our assets are valued, so and we go through a process. We've got a very detailed asset registers. We have to adjust prices based on current values each year. So, for instance, drainage works, if we have new drains go in 450mm pipes, we reassess the value of our pipe network. So we have those values, and they all flow through from our asset systems through to Roof's financial systems. You won't find the Swan Street Bridge on it though, Brian, because that's not our asset.
Isn't it? The Swan Street Bridge or the Swan Street Road is not an asset when actually the roads within a new development are.
So the Swan Street Bridge is a VicTrack asset. The bridge structure itself, the seal we maintain, but the bridge itself is a VicTrack asset.
Right, because for a long time now, I've wanted the council to value every parking spot in the CBD to give it a notional value. When we have changes within the city of roads and parks and whatever, we get this, we've removed 3 parking spots or 7 parking spots. Well, it's not just 7 parking spots, it's the value of the 7 parking spots. The parking spots in Oven Street are far, far more valuable than the parking spots in Baker Street. So I'm delighted to see that we're valuing our streets, and I look forward to some more detail. I thank you.
So just on the parking, Brian, the asset value is the value of the physical asset, so what it would cost to replace that asset. So it's the physical infrastructure, not the fact that it's a car park, but the fact that it's pavement, it's a seal, it's curbing, it's line marking. So that's the value of the asset that we record in our systems.
Just as an aside, I did ask a friend of mine when we were talking about the Maloney's Arcade, I said, how much would you pay for a car park? Exclusive use of a car park, you buy it. And he said about 35,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox. I'm just wondering if Mrs. Kneebone may have a ballpark figure of what our assets are valued at now. I seem to think that it was in the annual report.
If it's in the annual report, it'd actually be in the agenda, so I can go to that quickly.
You'd be surprised as to what valuation we have of our assets. My memory is around about 475 million, but I might be wrong.
I'll just flick past it. So in our balance sheet, property, infrastructure and plant and equipment is 488 million. So it's quite a lot.
Did you hear that, Mr. Fox? Any questions? Any further questions, Mr. Bell?
Yeah, this might be a quick one. The RV dump point, has that been decided on? I've been away for 8 weeks playing the grey nomad, so I'd see the importance of the dump points. Has that been decided yet?
Briefly, through the Mayor, no. There's 3 or 4 sites being investigated just to determine cost, logistics, those sort of things, and that will come back to Council shortly.
Okay. We've been travelling the last 8 weeks and with the grey nomads, and towns with dump points attract those grey nomads. And when they're in the town, they spend money. Longreach had a free camp about 5 k's out of town, and the local caravan parks wanted to have it closed. So the council at Longreach put a box out there and said any receipts of money you spend in Longreach, put in the box. And they found that there was thousands and thousands of dollars being spent in Longreach by the people who do free camping. But they come into town and they empty their toilets. So a dump point is important, I believe, and I believe that Apex Park is the ideal spot. You got the road to come in, the road to come out, and if I can say, after working in the facilities area, the toilet facilities or the pump system in Apex Park does need an upgrade, and there's an opportunity to upgrade and put a dump point, and it'll bring people to the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Summers. Funny how I know most of the faces.
Ron Summers. I'm a nomad and there's not too much grey, but I've recently been away, and just following up a question I asked sometime last year about signage for RVs for bigger vehicles and what have you, because and also the enforcement of the spaces that are available around the town, if you can find them, to make sure that they are available for bigger vehicles and not just cars just parking there and what have you like that. But lack of signage is really bad.
Thank you. You want to answer that?
Look, we do have long vehicle car parks around the CBD area. There is some signage on. You obviously would like more. This is one of the things that's being looked at with the parking strategy that's going to occur shortly. So we're going to look at all parking around the CBD, and it will include long vehicles and signage, etc. So we'll have someone independent give us a view and recommendations on that. And we're scoping that up and going out for someone to do that right as we speak.
If I could just make a comment there that a couple of months ago I had a visit from an ex-mayor who decided that he would park in the Long Bay and received a parking ticket for it. So they are policed. Any other questions? Yes, down the back there.
Jill Baker. I'll make this very quick. We're starting to shiver down the back there. This air conditioning's excellent. Just a question about that nasty little alien that's about to invade us all again, Queensland fruit fly. It seems that over the last few years, agencies such as DWELB and DPI and the council too have pretty well abrogated their responsibility in this respect. And I belong to the Wangaratta Sustainability Network, and we have over the years tried to run various workshops and put out information there. Nothing has been happening for the last 2 or 3. I wondered if anything is planned. I would have thought that in an area like this that depends so much on its agriculture and viticulture and horticulture, that this fly that's becoming endemic, it could actually be a serious biosecurity issue. Does anyone have any response to that question, please?
Not specifically by the look of it, I was just looking to Barry Green, whose area it sits in. Ordinarily, previously, most work in this space has sat with a state government body called DELP. I don't think that's changed.
I think council has been active in the past with lures and so on.
Yeah, ordinarily based on resources provided by that government department. So, given that none of us are sure what's happening, we'll take that on notice and go back to DELP and find out what, if anything, is planned.
I think there are some very good process being put in place by some councils around. Berrigan comes to mind. There's not Cobram maybe, where councils are actually surveying their residents to see if they have unwanted fruit trees and offering to help them to remove them, and also taking the ones that have self-seeded along the roadsides. And as you probably saw as you came out, there are beautiful blossoms on the road out from Wangaratta. They will be infested with fruit flies fairly soon. So I think that's perhaps something that council might take on board. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance tonight. We've gone a little bit longer than usual, and it's great to see so many people in the gallery. So for those who've taken the time to come and listen to the deliberations of the council, thank you very much, and I'll declare the meeting closed.